Hello everyone, a very good morning to all of you. Today we are going to have a discussion on the 26th February 2024, the Hindu analysis. Now first and foremost, let's have a look at all the articles that we have for you today. Now when you look at all these articles that we have here, there are a total of 7 articles where we kind of need a detailed analysis, and then there is one small article also that I have taken which we saw in today's newspaper. Now when we look at these all articles that we have, first is with regards to the Gaganyaan mission and a test that has been done with regards to this mission. So what is this test and what is this mission? We'll try to understand that. And then there is one article with regards to certain changes, amendments that have been done to the surrogacy rules. So we'll try to understand what exactly these changes are and why these changes are important. Then after that, there is something based on the moon missions, that there are various moon missions that are being taken all across the world, including India. So that's why we have to understand why exactly are we moving towards moon and what is the significance of all these moon missions. Then, can the IMEC address the Red Sea crisis? And this is an article related to something that we have been very often discussing over the past few months, and in that regard there is one more aspect that has been brought out in this particular article. So we'll discuss about the Red Sea crisis and all the significance that we have with regards to the IMEC. Then poverty levels below 5% claims NITI Aayog chief, and declining food spends likely to turn spotlight on development. We'll take these two articles together. Alright, we'll take these two articles together and we'll try to understand various aspects of what is being discussed, and we'll go beyond the article and try to understand the various aspects of food prices versus consumer spending versus the inflation. And then, why has Google paused Gemini's ability to generate AI images of people? We'll discuss something which is called as bias in AI, and we'll try to understand the various aspects of it. And then there is one small article that we have here, number of nuclear power reactors in India will add by 2022. So these numbers have been published, so we'll try to understand all that. Alright, so without further delay, let's begin with the session. The first article that we have here is related to your GS paper 3, Science and Technology. Now this article basically talks about the CE20 engine that has a notable legacy. Now what is this CE20 engine, and we'll try to understand the various technical aspects of what is being talked about, and then the future course of where we are moving. Now overall, when it comes to this article basically talks about the Gaganyaan mission, and I'm sure that you all have heard of the Gaganyaan mission, and there is a key test that was done, and this is what was done on 21st of February, that ISRO announced successful human rating of the CE20 rocket engine, crucial for the upcoming Gaganyaan mission, which is going to launch Indian astronauts to space. Now what exactly is the article talking about? Here what we see is that when it comes to this particular engine, this engine is something which you can say in a manner is an advanced cryogenic engine, and this is something that has been developed for the GSLV Mark III, which is now also called as LVM3, that is Launch Vehicle Mark III. Now this is a launch vehicle which is heavy launch vehicle. This is a launch vehicle which is able to launch heavier satellites and heavier payloads, which we did not have the capacity earlier. So here we see that there is an advanced capacity, a better capacity compared to the last few engine types that we have seen. Before this CE20, there has been another version of the engine as well, called as the CE 7.5. So we'll discuss about that also, that what do we mean by CE 7.5, what is CE20, etc. Now overall, this article also talks about the advantages of the fuel that is being used. Here in this particular scenario, in the Gaganyaan mission, where we are using the GSLV Mark III, also called as the LVM3, here we are using liquid hydrogen mixed with liquid oxygen. Now the advantage of using such an engine has been many, and this is what the article also talks about, that how exactly it is able to provide a better velocity as compared to the previous generations of the engines. That for example, the velocity that we will be able to reach with regards to CE20 engine is 4.5 kilometers per second, which is much better than all the previous versions of the engines that we have had. So that's why it talks about this particular scenario. And at the same time, when it comes to the cryogenic engine technology that is being used here, this becomes very, very crucial from the perspective of getting all the better launches done for the future, the heavier launches that we want to do, in the future. So let's try to understand all these things, and let's try to declutter all this information that I've just given you. So first and foremost, when we look at this mission, we are talking about the Gaganyaan mission. And this Gaganyaan mission has been in discussion for a very long time now. And earlier, although it was supposed to be launched a couple of years back, but because of various technical aspects and various testings that we have in place, and also all the safety parameters that we need to very crucially look into for this particular mission, also led to a certain delays that has happened in the mission. Also because of COVID-19, this mission got delayed by a couple of years. So when it comes to this mission, try to understand what is this mission. When we look at this Gaganyaan mission, the Gaganyaan mission has been seen to be a very, very important and ambitious mission of ISRO. This is a mission which has been undertaken with the primary objective to demonstrate India's capacity to send humans to the low Earth orbit and return them safely to the Earth as well. And here some of the important aspects when it comes to it. So it is a mission that will carry a crew of Indian astronauts into space. So we are going to carry them into space, specifically to the low Earth orbit. Now this low Earth orbit basically is the orbit which is near the Earth, which is very, you can say that the altitude is up starting from almost 180 kilometers going up to 2000 kilometers. So that part of the orbit is called as the low Earth orbit. So just beyond the Earth's atmosphere, the orbit that you have is called as the low Earth orbit. Alright. Now why low Earth orbit? Because low Earth orbit is very near to the Earth, so that's why sending the astronauts to the low Earth orbit and bringing them back will be easier as compared to if we were going higher up. So that's why looking at the safety concerns, looking at all the aspects of trying to ensure the safety and security of all the astronauts going into the space, it becomes very, very crucial that instead of going far beyond the Earth's atmosphere, we should try to focus on the low Earth orbit, and that's why low Earth orbit has been chosen. So this is the primary objective of this particular mission. Now in this particular mission, what we see is that there is a crew capsule. There is a crew capsule that will be used, and this crew capsule is something which is going to be very specially designed, and where you have these two modules called as the crew and the service module. Now in this particular module, what we see is that astronauts will be there in the crew module, and all the necessary life support systems and the control systems that are required for the entire duration of the mission will be provided in this particular module. The launch vehicle that is being used, as we just discussed, the launch vehicle to be used will be GSLV Mark III. The launch vehicle that we are using is GSLV Mark III, which is now also called as LVM-3. Understand that when we say GSLV Mark III, it means that it is the third generation of the GSLVs. GSLV standing for Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle. So these are the heavier launch vehicles. Alright, these are the heavier launch vehicles, and we'll discuss about GSLVs in particular. So these are the heavier launch vehicles, and until now you can say this is the most powerful launcher that India has had until now, and that's why it will be capable of taking the crew and the service module into the space. So this is basically what we are trying, and overall when it comes to the mission duration and the orbit, for approximately 5 to 7 days we will be carrying the people and carrying the astronauts into space. They will remain there, they'll do the scientific activities for which they are going there, and then after that they will be brought back. So overall we have seen that for this there is a particular crew selection and training method that has been used by ISRO, so that they have selected and trained them. They were sent to Russia, and from Russia they basically have come back and they have been trained properly with regards to how to survive in missions like these. Now overall what we see is that there has been very rigorous physical and psychological assessment that has been done, and specialized training has been carried out for all these people who have been chosen. Now overall when it comes to this mission, understand the basic objectives. The basic objective first and foremost is to demonstrate the capacity of human space flight, that India has the capacity of human space flight. So it's a kind of a demonstration mission, and at the same time there are certain experiments also to be conducted. For example, experiments in microgravity conditions. Microgravity, this is a keyword that you will always find with regards to the Gaganyaan mission. Microgravity experiments. Now when we say microgravity experiments, the meaning of the term is that when you go to space, as you go away from the earth, the gravitational force will keep on decreasing, because gravity is always related to how close you are to the given mass. So as you move away from the earth, the gravitational force on any object will keep on decreasing. And when you are in space, far away from any celestial body like the earth, then in that case the gravitational effects are very, very weak. And these conditions, when you have very weak gravitational force, this is called as microgravity. So just remember this term microgravity, because every time the objectives of Gaganyaan mission will be mentioned somewhere, this term microgravity will always be mentioned. So that's why just remember this term microgravity. So microgravity means when you have extremely weak gravity. So that's why it is called as microgravity. Now gravitation can never be zero. Alright, wherever you go, the gravitational force will keep on decreasing as you go far off, but it will never become zero. Right? So that's why the term microgravity is being used in this particular scenario. So that's why here it mentions that they will be conducting experiments in microgravity conditions. So that is the exact meaning of microgravity conditions, and at the same time it will help in getting various different aspects of scientific and technological advancements, and we'll be able to understand a lot of things with regards to the human body, how human body reacts, and how organisms in general also react to microgravity conditions. So that's why there are all these missions and all these objectives that we have kept as a part of the Gaganyaan mission. Now this Gaganyaan mission, this year's examination can be specifically important because we are supposed to launch the Gaganyaan mission this year. There have been various tests that have been conducted for the Gaganyaan mission, and specifically you will see that the focus will also be on the GSLV. Now GSLV stands for Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle. Now this GSLV becomes very, very crucial because this GSLV is something which is able to carry heavier loads. Alright, this can carry heavier loads. Now when it comes to heavier payloads, specifically communication satellites become very, very crucial in that scenario, because initially when India did not have the GSLV, India did not have the capacity to launch its own communication satellites, and we used to go to France and get our launches done. So that changed with the advent of GSLV. So that's why GSLV becomes very crucial in this aspect. Now if you look at this GSLV, just understand some of the basics of GSLV and how exactly do we see it. These two that you see, these two are called as the solid boosters. These are solid boosters, meaning that they carry solid fuel which is called as, may not be important for you, but just for your reference, called as HTPB, hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene. No need to remember the name. So solid boosters are there, and then you have this part which is the liquid booster or the liquid fuel. So this is where the liquid fuel is carried, called as UDMH or unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine. Again, the name is not important. And then after that there is this stage, and this is the central focus of this article, and this basically is where you have the CE20 engine. This is the CE20 cryogenic engine. Now when we say cryogenic will again be at the center of all the discussions that happens with regards to all these tests and the Gaganyaan mission as well. So what exactly is this cryogenic engine? So cryogenic engine is a kind of engine always remember, when you have this term cryo, whenever you see this term cryo, the meaning of this term cryo is extremely low temperature. Extremely low temperature. Alright. So meaning that this is an engine that will function at extremely low temperature, and that's why when it comes to the cryogenic engine carries a combination of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. Liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. And maintaining the stability of liquid oxygen and hydrogen is not that easy. And that's why having cryogenic engine itself is not a very easy job. If you look at the number of countries who have cryogenic engines, you'll find that there are a handful of countries in the world. India has it now. India has it. Russia has had it. US has it. Then other countries like European Union, for example, has it. They have been using for their space missions. Plus China also has it. Japan also has it. So these are some of the countries who have the access to cryogenic technology. So it's a technology which is not easy to develop, and that's why only handful of countries in the world have an access or have developed this cryogenic engine. So this cryogenic engine is at the focus because this is what will enhance the capacity and has been able to carry the humans into space. And this, the last part that you see, this is where you would have the modules. Alright, this is where you have the payload, or you can say the satellite or the crew module, etc. All these things will be placed at the topmost part of this launcher. So this GSLV basically becomes a launch vehicle, that it will launch any satellite or any payload that you want to launch into space. So this is how this entire thing is working. And in this article there is also a mention about the various kinds of engines that we have had over the years. So that's why it is talking about the cryogenic engine. And as I told you that cryogenic, whenever you see the term cryo means extremely low temperature. So the engines that are working at extremely low temperatures will be called as cryogenic engines. So in this particular scenario, what we see is that it uses liquid fuels and oxidizers. Now this liquid fuel here in this particular scenario is liquid hydrogen, and the oxidizer that is being used is liquid oxygen. Alright. So overall we see that there are several advantages that we get out of cryogenic engine, and that's why cryogenic engine has been at the center of development of this heavy launch vehicle. Now when it comes to cryogenic technology, it has not been easy for us to get hands to the cryogenic technology. We have tried for a very long time. We first tried collaborating with France, and then we were also in there was a time when we were also about to buy it from the US, but the cost was very high. And then the technology transfer was supposed to happen from Russia, Soviet Union at that time, which the US did not let it happen, because of which we could not get hands to this technology because of the Cold War scenario that we had between the US and Russia. It also had us suffering because of that. So but ultimately what happened is that we were able to make our own cryogenic engine. We were able to understand the technology and build it on our own, which was a very significant aspect of India's space technology. You might have, some of you might have seen the film Rocketry, and if you have seen the film Rocketry, it also talks about some of these aspects of India's history with the cryogenic engine. And if you want, there is also a very wonderful book that has been written on all these stories called as ISRO, A Personal Story. So if you just want to read all the history of what happened with cryogenics and everything, there is this book which gives you a very good scenario of everything that happened. So anyway, so the cryogenic engines become very, very crucial, and we see that with regards to cryogenic engine, these three have been mentioned in this article: the KVD1, CE 7.5 and CE 20 engines. Now this KVD1 engine is the engine that was developed originally in the Soviet Union, and then after that this engine was provided to India, and this became GSLV Mark 1. If you see this, this is something that became GSLV Mark 1. The first cryogenic engine that we used in our GSLVs was not an Indian made engine. It had a Russian made engine which was called as KVD1. So This became very crucial because now we had the capacity to at least launch our own satellites with regards to with the help of our own launch vehicles. Now after this we see that we started developing our own cryogenic technology. First it was CE 7.5, and when we started using CE 7.5, this is where we see that CE 7.5 was developed, and CE 7.5 led to India's GSLV Mark II. This is where we had the second version of the engine called as GSLV Mark II, where we now developed cryogenic technology on our own. And this was very significant departure from our you can say dependence on all these countries, now that we had our own engine. And then we have CE20, which is much better version of CE 7.5. We see that it is able to produce better thrust, it is able to give you better velocity, and hence it has a better carrying capacity as compared to the previous ones. So that's why CE20 becomes very, very crucial, because this is what leads to GSLV Mark III. GSLV Mark III, or something which is also now called as LVM3. So that's why these three engines become important. CE 7.5 and CE 20 have been developed in India, while KVD-1 was the first engine that we had borrowed from Russia, and we were using it in our GSLV Mark 1. Now GSLV Mark 1 and Mark 2, initially you will see that they have not been very successful. You will see that almost there has been just 50% success. But with GSLV Mark 3 and all the developments that has happened with the CE 20 engine, and all the stability that we have seen with the engine, we see that now we have much better capacity and much better success rate. For the last 10 years, if you look at the data, you'll find that there hasn't been any unsuccessful mission with regards to these GSLVs. So that's why this has become very, very significant improvement with whatever has been happening in India. Now one more thing that has been mentioned in this article is about something called as human rating of the engines. Now human rating of the engines basically refers to the process of certifying the system to ensure that it is safe for carrying astronauts. Alright, so overall there will be testing of the engines if, let's say, no humans are to be carried, but if humans are to be carried, then there have to be specific tests that we have to do, and only then they would be allowed to be sent to space. So in this particular regard, when we see human rating, this is what the article says, that the human rating now has been successful. So human rating, or the human testing that we do, has been successful. That human rating has come out to be very good. And here what we see is that there are comprehensive set of engineering and design criteria, there are testing protocols, and there are various safety standards that ensure that the vehicle can reliably transport humans to space and return them back safely to the Earth. And that's why this is a very rigorous process, so that all the inherent risks that we have in the space flight, all these things can be minimized as much as possible, and the chance of injury or loss of life can completely be negated as much as possible. So that's why we see that there are all these aspects that we have with regards to the human rating, and that's why this is human rating of the engines is the process of certifying that the engine is safe for carrying the astronauts. So just remember all these terms, because not only in prelims examination but also from mains perspective, many of these areas can become crucial, specifically this year, because Gaganyaan mission is supposed to be launched this year. Now article number 2 is this: why were surrogacy rules modified? Now this you can say with regards to health issues in GS paper 2 or science and technology in GS paper 3. From both the aspects, this can become an important article. Now what exactly are we talking about? So first understand the context of the article. So context of the article is this, that the Union government has amended the surrogacy rules of 2022, and it has allowed the married couples to use donor eggs or sperm, reversing March 2023 ban on the donor gametes. Now what exactly are we saying? So in the context of this article, first understand what do we mean by surrogacy. What is surrogacy? What are the different types of surrogacy? And what is this change that happened last year, which has been reversed, which has been modified again? And then lastly, some of the criticisms that we have for against the surrogacy rules that exist in India. So first and foremost, what do we mean by surrogacy? Now, when it comes to surrogacy, understand this, that surrogacy is a kind or is a method of assisted reproduction where an individual or couple, they arrange for the surrogate mother to carry and give birth to the child on their behalf. So that's why surrogacy. Surrogacy is where you have another woman who would act as a surrogate mother, and she would be the one to give the birth to the child on the behalf of the parents. Now, when it comes to this surrogacy, the surrogate mother may be the child's genetic mother as well, or she may not be the genetic mother. So there are these two processes that we have. One is called as traditional surrogacy and the second one is called as gestational surrogacy. So what is traditional surrogacy versus what is gestational surrogacy? Just try to understand this. When it comes to traditional surrogacy, in this kind of arrangement, the surrogate mother will also be the egg donor, which also makes her the biological mother of the child. And her egg would be fertilized typically through artificial insemination or using the sperm from the father. And this is something which is intended as the father will be intended as the sperm donor. And here the mother who carries the baby also provides her own egg. This means that the biological mother of the baby is the donor because the egg that was fertilized came from the surrogate mother. So that's why this is something which is also called as traditional surrogacy. Alright, so in traditional surrogacy, what do we see? That the surrogate mother will be also the egg donor. Alright, so just understand this. Traditional surrogacy, surrogate mother is the egg donor. Alright, surrogate mother is the egg donor. So in a manner you can say that she becomes the biological mother of the child. Alright, she becomes the biological mother of the child because she has provided her egg cells in this fertilization, and she is the one in her womb only all the development of the child would be happening. The embryonic development will be happening inside the uterus of the surrogate mother. And then there is gestational surrogacy. Now, gestational surrogacy is the more common form of surrogacy in today's world. In this particular scenario, what we see is that the child is not genetically related to the surrogate mother. Instead, the embryo is created using the egg from the intended mother or the egg donor, and the sperm is taken from the intended father or the sperm donor. Alright, so the original mother and the father would be contributing their egg cells and the sperm cells, and then the embryonic development will happen inside the surrogate mother's uterus. So that's why in this particular scenario you can say that the baby is not genetically related to the woman who is carrying the baby, meaning that the surrogate mother is not the biological mother. The biological mother and the father or the original mothers and father who was intended. So that's why the egg basically will come from the intended mother and the sperm can come from the intended father. And in this particular scenario, the combination will be done in a lab through the process which is called as in vitro fertilization, and then the resulting embryo is again placed back to the surrogate mother's womb. So this is where we say that this is gestational surrogacy. So gestational surrogacy, just understand this, that surrogate mother only contributes to embryonic development, meaning the development of the embryo inside her body would happen. Embryonic development, and that's why she is not the biological mother. Alright, that's why she will not be the biological mother of the child. She would only be carrying the embryo in her womb and will help in the development of the baby, which will happen inside her body. So this is the more common form of surrogacy that we see today. So overall what we see is that surrogacy arrangements are often sought by individuals and couples who cannot conceive or cannot carry a pregnancy through the term for various different reasons, medical reasons, including maybe infertility, maybe absence of uterus, maybe risk of health in pregnancy, or there can be let's say possibility of, let's say, if there are repeated miscarriages that has happened. So in all these cases we see that they would go and take this option of gestational surrogacy through something called as in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization. So this is what will happen in this particular scenario. And this case, when it comes to this surrogacy, here we see that there are various aspects now that develops. So the legality of surrogacy has to be taken into account. The ethical and the social issues have to be taken into account. So that's why there are diverse regulations and there are different legal frameworks that are in place across different countries, and that's why there are certain rules with regards to the same in India as well. Now when we look at these rules, so when we look at these rules in India, understand what happened until now, that when we are talking about the modification in the rules, what exactly is the modification talking about? Initially what we see is that in 2023, that is last year, India had made an amendment to the surrogacy rules, and this is specifically something that addresses the use of donor gametes in the surrogacy. So if you look at the original rules before the amendment, so when we are talking about the rules of 2022, alright, so when we are talking about the surrogacy rules of 2022, in case of 2022 rules, initially the restriction of the donor eggs, or initially we saw that it restricted the use of the donor eggs or the sperm cells, sperms for the surrogacy. It simply meant that the couples who have been looking for a child through surrogacy were required to use their own genetic material. Alright, so limiting the options for those who have certain medical conditions. So for example, what we are saying is that the 2022 rules said that the cells or the the genes have to come from the original mother and the father. The sperm cells have to be taken from the original father and the egg cells have to be taken from the original mother. So nobody else is supposed to be involved in this process of surrogacy. So now what happens is that this kind of a rule also limits the aspect of surrogacy, because if, let's say, because of certain medical condition the woman cannot contribute or the man cannot contribute, then in that case they do not even have an option to go for the surrogacy options in India. So this was what was seen in 2022. Now in case of the 2023 amendment, what we see is that the union government had modified the rules in February 2023, and it allowed the married couples to use the donor or the sperm cells for surrogacy. And this change was aimed basically to provide relief to the couples who are facing medical complications, and that made it difficult for them to conceive using their own gametes. So this is where the changes were made, that okay, fine, you can actually go and use the donor gametes. So this is what was done for in 2023. Now although these modifications were made, so 2022 what we said was that the gametes or the reproductive cells have to come from the intended father and mother. So this was said. Now in this regard what happens is that if any one of the two have medical conditions, then in that case they cannot even go for the surrogacy option. So then there was an amendment made in 2023 that the donor gametes were allowed. Right? Donor gametes were allowed. So in 2023 we saw that. Now there were certain conditions that were put on how the donor gametes can be used. The amendment specifically mentioned that married couples can use a donor gamete if one partner has a medical condition that necessitates such an intervention, meaning that one of the gametes have to come from the intended parents. So either the mother donation can be done or the father donation can be done. Both cannot be done. So then in this particular scenario, we see that still there is restriction. So overall there was a requirement for genetic connection. All right, this was the condition that was put. The condition was that at least one parent should be genetically connected to the child. All right, at least one of the parents should be genetically connected to the child. So this was the amendment made in 2023, and this was the condition that was kept here. So now what happens is, in this particular scenario again, if let's say both the parents are due to medical reasons, if they are not qualified enough to reproduce, then in that case they cannot even go for the surrogacy option. And then there was an exclusion of single women as well, that the amendment did not extend the provision to use the donor gametes to a single woman. All right, even in case of divorcees and widows. So such individuals are required to have their own eggs and the donor sperm to pursue the surrogacy. So this amendment is something that was a reversal of the previous restriction and was made after considering the changes faced by the couples of specific medical conditions that prevented them from having genetically related children through surrogacy. Now, overall, this is where we have seen that there is a change that has been done, and in this particular scenario, when the change has been done, now we see that they have been allowed, the married couples have been allowed to go for this surrogacy even if both of them are not related to the child. So married couples have been allowed, and in case of single women, if they are widowed or if they are divorcees, then in that case they are allowed. They are allowed to go for the surrogacy route. So that's why this is where we see that now these modifications will extend this option of surrogacy to people who until now could not have availed it. So that's why this is a welcome step in regards to the rules that have been modified. Now, overall, although this is a very good step, this is a positive step in this particular scenario, but we still see that there is a problem, and this problem, there are certain issues, there are certain criticisms that still remain with regards to the surrogacy rules in India. First, some of the restrictions that we still have, where we are talking about the single individuals or the LGBTQ plus couples or the live-in partners, they have been excluded altogether. So that is where some of the criticisms are coming, that they should also, there should be some way where they are also being given this option. Then the prohibition on the commercial surrogacy, that commercial surrogacy altogether in India has been not allowed as far as these rules are concerned. Initially it used to be allowed in India, but now we see that all these have not been allowed, and this is where again we see that there are certain criticisms with regards to the same. Then at the same time what we see is that there are certain aspects with regards to who is allowed in case of surrogacy, that for example only close relatives can act as a surrogate without any financial compensation beyond medical compensations and the insurance. So they have to be very closely related to the person, and only then they are allowed to go for taking that surrogate route. That if somebody wants to become, let's say, a surrogate mother, then she has to be related to who she is doing that surrogacy for. So that's why that close relation is required here. And this is where also we see that the ambit actually gets restricted, and hence it also has been sometimes criticized in this particular regard. Then with regards to some of the legal issues also, we have seen that there are very stringent conditions in certain cases. The eligibility is not that easy, getting that certificate is not that easy. So that's why we see that there have been certain criticisms with regards to the same as well. Now, apart from that, there are other aspects of, for example, medical tourism, where it is also being criticized that it also impacts India's medical tourism, and India has been known for, has been a popular destination for international surrogacy. But now because of these regulations, we see that this is more or less the end of medical tourism for surrogacy in India. So that's why we see that there are certain criticisms like these which always come in the way. And again, with regards to the LGBTQ plus community plus the live-in partners, etc., because the rules still go against them. So that's why we see that there are all these kinds of criticisms that we have currently for the rules in India. So although there are certain modifications which are good, which are in a positive direction, but we still see that there are changes that are required. Then coming to the next article, and this is a new success, again related to GS paper 3, Science and Technology. Now, this editorial, this has been published in the editorial page of your newspaper, and this talks about all the moon missions that of late have been increasing. That we have seen the success of Chandrayaan 3 very recently. Plus, apart from that, there are some of the other missions which have been taken worldwide, whether it is Russia, whether the private missions in the US, or the Artemis mission that is going to carry people of color to the moon for the first time. So there are all these missions, and we see that there is a renewed path towards the moon. We see that this is phase 2 of moon landings. Phase 1 of moon landings, you will see that it started 1959 onwards, and there was a kind of competition between the Soviet Union then and the United States then, and this was the Cold War era where there was a space competition, that who goes to the moon, who lands on the moon, etc. Now we see that there is a phase 2 where a lot of private participation also comes in. That until now we see that all these have been purely some country's mission, but now we see that there are private missions that are coming into the scenario. So one of those missions is what it has talked about, that there is a company called as Intuitive Machines. It is a US based company, and they are now going to the moon with their own mission. So private missions are also now going to the moon. So overall, when you look at this mission, this article, this basically is the context, that moon landings are now accelerating and more countries are participating with new standards for success. So with regards to India also, we have seen that when it comes to Chandrayaan 3, Chandrayaan 3 was successfully able to soft land on the moon, which was big for India and big for ISRO, and we have been able to do that experimentally. We have been successful, and overall there have been some of the other missions. For example, the Luna 25 mission also went from Russia, although it was not successful, but we still see that because the way they went, obviously they would learn from their failures, and they would also improve further in the future. And then there are the programs based out of the US and the programs which have been backed by NASA. For example, there is the Commercial Lunar Payload Service. All right, this is something which is being talked about in this article, Commercial Lunar Services. So payload services. So Commercial Lunar Payload Services, and through these kind of programs we see that that NASA also has been supporting many of these missions, and hence we see that this is something that brings in the private participation into moon landing. So overall we see that all these have been increasing, and these all missions have been increasing, and overall the private sector also has been starting to play a big role here. Now overall, when it comes to this mission or all these missions, if you look at a close history of moon landings or moon missions, the first one was in 1959. 1959, the Soviet Union had launched Luna 1. All right, in 1959 there was the mission called as Luna 1, and this Luna 1 mission became the first mission to go to the moon. All right, the first mission to go to the moon, and this is where it was a historic success. And then after that there was Luna 2, which was the first mission to go on the moon, then Luna 3 to take the first photograph of the moon, and then there were the Apollo missions, right? So Apollo missions, the NASA had launched, and then we see that especially Apollo 11 in 1969, 10 years later, 1969, Apollo 11 mission. This is where we see that Apollo, they were able to land on the moon and send people on the moon for the first time. So this was a big success, right? It was a big success because now they were able to land on the moon with Apollo 11. So this was, so you can say this was phase one, where we saw that there were a lot of competition and a lot of these missions were being launched by, especially by US and Russia. And then after that, when we look at the present scenario, we see that now countries like India, China, Japan, all these countries have started coming in, plus all the private entities, they have also started launching their missions onto the moon. So we saw the Chandrayaan 3 mission, we saw the Chang 4 mission, Chang 5 mission. All these missions are also now related to the moon and the new phase of moon landings and the new moon missions. So overall, that's why we have seen that there is a kind of a new era of new moon missions now, and all these lunar missions are being taken. Now why? Why are we even going to the moon? Is there any advantage that we have? So these are some of the points where you can say that we see that there are certain advantages to the moon missions. So for example, the advancements in science and technology. We see that they are helping us in understanding the various advancements of the miniaturization or the smaller satellites that we are launching, or in robotics and in material sciences we are able to do better. Similarly, there are a lot of economic opportunities on the moon as well. That we talk about mining operations that can of the precious metals and even isotopes like helium-3, which is potentially very helpful for fusion energy of the future. So that's why there are all these aspects that we also talk about. Then the space infrastructure development that is happening, we see that there are various aspects of the groundwork, the communication networks, etc., that we have been building. Then with regards to the global collaborations, many of these missions you'll see that various different countries are collaborating. India has been, for example, taking some help from countries like Russia or NASA, etc. So we see that they also have been contributing a lot. And then after that, of course, there has been public engagement and education with regards to going to the moon, exploring the moon and all these things. And there has been some kind of public awareness as well with regards to the moon missions. And then after that, the preparation for other missions, because moon, you can say, is the closest neighbor in case of celestial bodies. So once we are successful on the moon, it will also help us in going further, that we then landing on Mars or going to other planets and going far beyond may also become possible. And that's why this is where we see it having a very, very important aspect. And then enhancing the understanding of the Earth. This also becomes very, very crucial, because studying the moon also might help the scientists to understand the Earth's history. And it would include insights into the formation of the moon and the effects that it might have on Earth's geology and climate. So there are all these advantages that we can think of, and that's why there are so many of these lunar missions that we have been taking up, including our own Chandrayaan 3 mission. Now the next article is about, can the IMEC address the Red Sea crisis? Now Red Sea crisis is something that has been in the news for quite some time now. Over the past few months, constantly it has been in the news. So this time the context of this particular news article is that the crisis now has disputed or disrupted the global supply chain, and this is causing increased cost or in delays or even in product shortages that have been happening elsewhere. And because this particular strait, that is the Bab al-Mandab Strait, this becomes very, very crucial. And if you look at the map, for example, this is the area that we are talking about, all right, this area, and the conflict that we have in this area because of various different aspects. So this is the context of this article, that what has been happening, and we understand that Red Sea is very, very important, because approximately 12% of the international merchandise passes through Red Sea, and that's why the conflict has forced the rerouting, which has increased the cost and increased the delay of the products and services. And overall, when it comes to India, we have seen that there has been a significant impact on India as well, because significant proportion of its trade with Europe and North African countries are getting affected because of the crisis here, and it has led to in many cases, reduced shipments and economic concerns as well. So that's why we see that there are all these problems, and this is where we are talking about the alternatives. And one of the alternatives is where IMEC becomes viable. So what is IMEC? We'll try to understand, and then Red Sea and its importance, something that we have always been discussing. So with regards to understanding of the issues first, that when we look at the Red Sea, what are the various aspects of the issue? We know that the Red Sea route, despite the critical importance for the global trade and shipment, it faces very severe issues that are disrupting the maritime traffic, and they have very broad geopolitical and even environmental implications. So we know, for example, about the geopolitical tension. We know that this region which is surrounding the Red Sea has a lot of geopolitical conflicts and a lot of tensions, including civil wars, including the various interstate conflicts that have happened here, political instability in countries like Yemen or Sudan or Somalia, which are countries which are in this particular area. Similarly, the tensions also threaten the security of the shipments, and we have seen that there are so many cases of piracy in these kind of areas as well. So the piracy and maritime security also becomes very crucial, because the southern entrance of the Red Sea near the Gulf of Aden, if you go back to this picture, so when we look at this the southern entrance, this is where you have one of the conflict zones, because it has been very notorious for piracy and armed robbery of all the ships here that pass through this particular area. So that's why, although there have been international efforts and there have been significantly reduced piracy incidents, we still see that the threat remains, and that's why there is a necessity of continued naval patrols and all the security measures for all the commercial vessels that pass through this particular area. Then there are navigational challenges as well, because this Red Sea is a very narrow channel, correct? And that's why there are places in this Red Sea which are also shallow. So the navigation is not that easy. So because of, and also the area between the Bab al-Mandab Strait and the Suez Canal, this becomes a choke point at both these places, and that's why many a times there are chances of accidents, there are chances of blockages. So that also becomes a concern many a times. Then apart from that, sometimes we also talk about ecological concerns or environmental concerns as well. So one has been all the security issues that we spoke of, right? One has been about security issues. Then the geography of this region itself, because it's a very narrow space and also shallow waters at times. So that's why this also is a problem. And then there are environmental factors also that many a times are discussed in the context of the Red Sea crisis. So Red Sea, for example, is ecologically sensitive area. There are certain corals also, the marine diversity are also vulnerable to the pollution from oil spills and the shipping accidents. Illegal fishing also happens in these areas. So there we see that the increased maritime traffic also raises the risk of environmental damage also in these kind of areas. So that's why this also is a major challenge. And then of course, because of all the conflicts that we have in this particular scenario, we see that whether it is piracy or blockages, etc., whether it is near Suez Canal or whether it is near the Gulf of Aden, we see that this becomes a major challenge for a lot of international trade happening through this particular area. So that's why we need to understand all these issues, that these issues are also causing a lot of problems, and there is a humanitarian crisis also in this particular area. There are so many conflicts, notably when it comes to Yemen or when it comes to Somalia or Sudan, these kind of areas, because they are very disturbed areas, so to say, that also brings in a problem with regards to this particular area. So that's why we have to understand that this Red Sea crucially becomes very, very important. That whether it is with regards to the global trade and shipping, or oil and energy transit, or the military importance that we have in this area, it becomes a very, very important economic zone also. And we know that there are so many of geopolitical tension in this particular area, and things that we have been discussing. So that's why I'm not going into the detail of this discussion, because very often we have discussed about this crisis in various different lectures of the Hindu analysis. So but we understand that it becomes a very crucial route. Now what about the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC? Now this IMEC, this is a proposed trade and transport corridor that is intended to connect India with the countries in the Middle East and also Europe. Last year, when the G20 summit happened in 2023, this corridor was announced, aiming to enhance the economic integration and facilitate a smooth and efficient movement of the goods between these areas. So that's why connecting India to Middle East and Europe. This is what this initiative is about, and this initiative basically says that there should be alternative routes to the traditional sea passages that are currently facing a lot of geopolitical tensions and disruptions. So that's why this IMEC becomes crucial in this particular scenario, because first we are talking about how to improve the connectivity, that by establishing a network of rail and the sea routes, the corridor will aim to try and improve the trade connectivity between India, the Middle East and the Europe. So then it will definitely have some economic benefits as well, that the corridor will have a reduced transit time and even the cost for the shipping of the goods between these areas, and potentially it can cut the journey time by up to 40%, and the transit cost can be cut by almost up to 30%. So that's why this is a big achievement if we are able to get to these numbers. Then apart from that, strategically also it becomes very, very important, because it provides you alternatives to the vulnerable maritime routes like the Suez Canal and the Gulf of Aden, etc. So that's why you can say in a manner the dependency that we have on all these choke points, that will start reducing. So that's why in all these cases we see that IMEC becomes very, very crucial, specifically with regards to India and how it can provide some alternatives to India. So that's why this IMEC becomes very, very important in India's trade perspective. Coming to the next article, there are two articles which are related. One is poverty levels below 5% claims NITI Aayog chief, and declining food spends likely to turn spotlight on development. Both of these related to your GS paper 3, Indian economy. Now, with regards to what exactly are we seeing here, the context, if we look at, what we are saying is that less than, or what has been claimed by NITI Aayog, that less than 5% of the Indians are now below the poverty line, and this is indicating a significant reduction in poverty and almost near eradication of extreme poverty in case of India. This is what has been claimed by the NITI Aayog. Now in this particular scenario, we see that there are a lot of aspects of what has been spoken of, that for example the growth in India has been described as broad-based, with rural incomes spending increasing faster than the urban incomes. So overall the rural economy, or the urban-rural consumption gap has actually narrowed, is what has been claimed. That many a times we talk about this, that the rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poorer, and especially in this context, the divide that we have between the urban and the rural areas, that becomes very crucial to understand. Now what has been claimed is that the divide that we had between the urban and the rural economies have started declining. So that is a very good step. That would be a very good indicator about Indian economy, that because that means that more money is flowing into the rural economy compared to traditionally what was happening. Now this is where it also talks about the spending of the food. The second article also talks about the spending of the food, that spending on food has reduced to below 50% of the total expenditure for a rural household, increasing in a manner you can say that the income or rather the savings are actually going to increase because of that. Lifestyle changes can actually come in the rural areas, which is evident from the spending patterns. So now in this particular scenario, when it comes to the changes in the consumption pattern, we see that there is a shift towards higher expenditure on convenience or consumer durables or in services, and we see that the total consumption on food, or sorry, total total spending on food has started to decrease. Now this is where we see that this can be a good indicator of a growing economy, is what has been argued. Now with regards to, when we look at this context, understand what exactly we mean, and especially how food prices, because this is something that has been a crux of both these articles. When we talk about how food prices, they are related to inflation. They are related to inflation or even consumer spending patterns. Now understand this. There are some things which are basics of your life, correct? And many a times in economic terms, we also talk about needs versus wants, correct? There are needs and there are wants. Now first you would obviously spend on needs, or at least you should first spend on needs and then think of wants. Now when it comes to needs, you can say that food is a need, correct? Spending on food is a need. Spending on shelter is a need. Spending on healthcare is a need. So there are some of these aspects which can be called as needs, where you cannot decrease that amount. You have to eat, correct? So you are going to eat and you are going to spend on that eating. Now if let's say the food prices are high or the food inflation is high, it means that a person would be spending a lot more on getting that food or getting access to food. Correct. So then in that case, if you are spending a lot on your food or spending a lot on your needs, then in that case it means that you have very little left to spend on your wants. That means that the consumer is not spending. So if the consumer is not spending, the economy cannot grow. Alright. So if let's say you spend less on your needs, let's say the food inflation comes down, then instead, let's say, of spending 50% of your money, if you are spending 30% of your money on food and other needs or requirements, then it means that you have 70% of the savings now, and this savings is what you can maybe invest, or maybe you can spend somewhere. Maybe you can buy a house because now you are spending a lot less, or maybe you can save a lot more. You can open investment accounts or fixed deposit accounts, etc. easily, because now you are spending less, and that in that case your flow of money into the economy will start to increase, and that is very good for any economy. So that's why this is what is being argued in general with regards to food prices versus the spending patterns. Now what we have seen is that the consumer spending in India on food has been very high. If you look at the data of all the developing nations, you'll see that India comes almost towards the higher end, where we spend a lot more on food as compared to many of the other countries because of food inflation. So that needs to come down, because only when it comes down, the consumer spending will be better, because food constitutes a very significant proportion of household expenditure, especially in the developing countries. And that's why high food prices can reduce the disposable income, and as more money is spent basically only on the basic necessities or the basic needs, and that's why you cannot spend on other goods and services. So that slows down the economic growth by reducing the overall consumer spending in a given country. And then when it comes to its relation to the inflation, so first is with regards to the consumer spending. And then its relation to inflation. Its relation to inflation in general. That the food prices basically become a very critical point of inflation with regards to especially the consumer price index or the CPI. When the food prices rise, it leads to higher inflation, and that will affect the cost of living and potentially lead to a lot of problems in regards to the spendings in the country. And that's why we see that very often the central banks like RBI, for example, will keep on monitoring all the food inflation, and very closely they will keep on monitoring to understand where the food inflation is, and they would always try to maintain a price stability. At the same time, food prices are also related obviously to poverty and inequality as well. increase in food prices will very disproportionately affect the lower income households versus the higher income households, where in case of lower income households, a larger share of the income on the food will be spent, and that will become very problematic for them, and that can lead to increasing poverty in these kind of areas or these kind of households. So that's why this becomes very crucial. It can lead to a lot of social and economics instability as well. Then it is also related to the agricultural sector, that for a country which has very significant agricultural sector like India, higher food prices can benefit the farmers and the rural communities by increasing their income. But this benefit can very widely vary depending on the structure of the agricultural sector as well. And that's why it may not actually all the time percolate to the smaller farmers. And that has been a big challenge, that the bigger farmers might be able to benefit a lot, but the smaller farmers still may not be able to. So that is where the problem lies in a lot of cases, even in case of agriculture. Then food prices are also related to the trade balance, that countries which are net importers of food might always see that their trade balance versus always will worsen with a rise in global food prices. So that's why when it comes to, so one has been about how it is related to agriculture, and then how it is also related to the trade balance. The trade balance, that if let's say a country is importing a lot of food, it also means that it is spending a lot of money, spending a lot of international currency, like let's say spending in dollars. So that means that our forex reserves would come down, and forex reserves coming down also means that we cannot trade a lot. We cannot trade a lot internationally. We'll have to always maintain that. So that also can lead to higher costs altogether, and overall this will be a kind of an imbalance for the country. So overall, that's why we see that food prices are related to a lot of these factors. Even let's say it is related to health and nutrition, that higher food prices can lead to malnutrition and health issues, especially among all the vulnerable populations. People may not be able to opt for healthy nutritional choices. They might have to opt for cheaper food, less nutritional food options, where they do not have to spend a lot. So that's why it can have a negative impact on health and nutrition. It can have a negative impact on health and nutrition. So that's why we need to understand this aspect also, and many times it can even lead to political instability. So food prices, that's why we have to understand not only from economic perspective but also from social and political perspective becomes very crucial. Then this article, why has Google paused Gemini's ability to generate AI images of people? Now what we have seen, if you look at the context of this article, what Google did was that Google announced a pause on Gemini's ability to generate images of people after inaccurately it was depicting historical figures, and it was challenging many stereotypes that 1920s and 1930s of Germany or of the US, it was giving a very different picture from the reality. So that's why there has been a pause, and even in India it was criticized because there was certain suggestions that it had made that the present government has implemented fascist policies, leading to the government also criticizing it for violating many of the laws in India. And overall we see that a lot of users also have been complaining that there has been a kind of bias in the kinds of images that have been generated. For example, when this Gemini was asked to generate pictures of a white family, it refused to do so, saying that they would not do anything which is racial in nature. But when the same was asked to generate pictures of a black family, it did. So that's why it shows some kind of bias with regards to the race or the ethnicity or the color. So that's why there have been all these criticisms altogether. So overall, when it comes to Gemini, this Gemini was introduced almost 3-4 weeks earlier, and it was made on the basis of Google's Imagine 2. Imagine 2. Alright, so based on Imagine 2, Gemini was experimented, and this is where it is able to generate AI based images. Alright, it is able to generate AI based images and pictures, and we see that there have been a lot of problems, a lot of criticisms, and Google also responded saying that they are trying to fix the biases, they are trying to fix the inaccuracies, and that's why they said that they are pausing the image generation for now, and then they will come back after they have been able to solve for many of these problems. Now, in this particular regard, what becomes important is for us to understand what is generative artificial intelligence. In the last couple of years, we have seen that generative AI or generative artificial intelligence has been in the news a lot, whether it is through ChatGPT or DALL-E or deepfake. All these are called as generative AI. Now, generative AI is called as generative because it can generate or create new content. All right, this is an AI that can create new content. Whether it is new text or maybe images or videos, but it can create new content. And that's why this content that it will create will be very much resembling of what a human might have created. Until now, let's say, if I don't know whether you have used ChatGPT, if you have not, you can go and do that. If you do any search on ChatGPT, it will give you the answers. If you go to a search engine, let's say when you go to Google and you type something, you search for something, they'll give you a lot of links, a lot of website links, and where you can go and you can read. Whereas in case of generative AI through ChatGPT, if you search for the same, it will give you an answer. All right, it will give you an answer on its own. So that is because it is able to create new content, whether it is text or images, audio, video, whatever it is. And this is something that is very similar to the training that is done. And this is where the generative AI will be working. Now try to understand how it works. All right. So first thing will be data collection. That the artificial intelligence will be fed with a large set of data, a huge amount of content, whether it is text articles, images, music, video, etc. It will be just fed with a lot of these things. So first step here will be data collection. So first it will collect a lot of data, and once it has collected all this data, this is where we see that it will start building learning patterns, that through a process which is called as training. All right, so you are training that system to identify something or something else. So this artificial intelligence will be able to analyze the data to learn the patterns or structures or relationship between the or within the content that you have fed into the system. And this is where it will try to adjust the various parameters. It will try to understand and minimize the problems with the output. So all these things will be done. And in this particular regard, once this training has been done, all right, so first is data collection, and once data collection has been done, then learning patterns or the training of the AI will be done. And once the training has been done, this is where various models will come up. All right, it will create various models. It will use various models to create these images. One of these has been very popularly known as GANs. This exactly what you see here is called as GAN, G-A-N, Generative Adversarial Network. All right, it is called as Generative Adversarial Network. Now this is a very important network, because this is something where there are two models. There is a generator and a discriminator. If you see here in this picture, you have a generator and you have a discriminator, and these two basically will be trained simultaneously. They will be trained simultaneously. The generator will keep on creating new data, while the discriminator will try to evaluate the authenticity of the data, where it will be happening in a manner that it will keep on, both of them will be trying to one up each other. Let me just give you an example. If you have watched this particular film, Dhoom 2, suppose that you have a thief and you have a police. Now this thief, let's say, is an art thief, that this thief creates counterfeit artwork, or maybe let's say counterfeit notes or duplicate artwork. Now what happens is that this this policeman also is trained to catch thieves like these, and these thieves will always try to ensure that they are creating something that cannot be caught in the market. All right, so if let's say they are creating duplicate artwork or duplicate notes, etc., nobody should be able to catch them, correct? And both of them will try to train themselves in a manner that always they will try to one up the other. So this basically becomes the generator. So Hrithik Roshan in that film was the generator, whereas Abhishek Bachchan was the discriminator. So this is how the things work. That first, let's say a duplicate note was printed. All right. Now this duplicate note has been caught by the police, because police is trained enough to catch that note. Now next time the thief will try to understand what was caught, what was wrong with the last note, so that they will improve upon that. So they'll improve upon that, and the police also will try to train more, improve more, so that they can catch the next time as well. So both of these will be trying to do that. Similarly, in case of generative AI, first a content will be generated. All right, first content will be generated by the generative AI, and then the discriminator will try to understand whether it is actual image, let's say in this particular scenario, whether it is the actual image or is it something that has been created. So it will try to understand each of the parameters here. So then after that, and it will try to cross-reference the same with the real data and see what the differences are between the real data and the one that has been created by the generator. And once they have, if they have been able to identify the changes, it will reject it. So whether it is real or fake, it will tell it. So once it has said that it is fake, the generator again comes back with an improved version of the last image, and this will go on until the time that whether it is fake or real, it is almost indistinguishable. That now this thief is so well trained that whatever they are producing is not distinguishable from the real content. So it will just look like a real content, and this is exactly how finally the GANs will be trained in a manner that they will be able to come through, and they'll be able to create data which look to be original data. So this is what will happen in this particular scenario. There are other models also, but we need not go into the details of those models. And once this has been done, this is where we see that the model will be able to generate new content. So ultimately it will now be able to generate content. So first you will have the next will be the models. So models like GAN, and then finally it creates content. Now it is able to create content. So this is where we'll see that now finally it will be able to get the real picture or something which looks like the real picture. So overall the final tuning etc. will be done to ensure that all these things are taken care of. Now this is where we need to understand one major problem, which is called as the bias problem in AI, and this is where the all the controversy has been. The bias problem in AI basically refers to the tendency of artificial intelligence systems to produce prejudiced results which are flawed in assumption because of their programming, because of the training data or the interpretation by the users who have created that AI. And these biases can manifest in various different forms, whether it is with regards to social or whether cultural or institutional prejudice that you might have in the system. Now all these prejudices that we have, they can create a lot of issues. For example, the AI systems can be used because AI systems are being used in making decisions, and in this particular process there are processes which can affect people's life, such as let's say in law enforcement or maybe in lending, in healthcare, even in hiring in many institutions. We see that AI is being used everywhere, and if there is a bias, then it can lead to a lot of issues. So there are various sources of bias. For example, the training data bias can be there, that obviously all the artificial intelligence, they learn from data, and if the data contains historic bias or lacks diversity, then in that case AI will also likely replicate the same or maybe even amplify that bias. So that's why, for example, a facial recognition system that has been trained only on images of, let's say, light-skinned individuals, then it may perform very poorly on dark skinned faces. So that's why that diversity in that training will be very, very important. So that's why when we look at the sources of the bias, first can be the training itself, that what is the data set with which the training of the AI has been done. So this can be one of the problems. Then there is something called as algorithm bias, where the algorithm themselves can be based on some kind of bias on which they are designed. For example, let's say the algorithm might prioritize the accuracy over the fairness of the result. So then it can give you biased outcomes with regards to which are going against certain groups. So that's why that will be called as algorithm bias. That algorithm itself is biased on the design itself. Then there can be human bias. So second is algorithm bias, and then there is human bias. Now, this human bias basically is about the individuals who are collecting data. They are the ones who are designing the model. They are the ones who are setting the objectives, which can unintentionally introduce their own bias into the AI-based systems. And this could include biases in, let's say, deciding what kind of data to include or what kind of data to exclude, or how to interpret certain results. So in all that cases, we see that the biases can come even from the humans who are designing the system. And that's why when you look at the impact of the bias, it can first lead to a lot of discrimination against maybe marginalized or maybe underrepresented groups, and that can reinforce stereotypes and inaccuracies in this particular AI. Similarly, there can be a lot of unfairness in the system, that it can lead to unfair treatment of individuals or groups in critical areas like maybe employment, or maybe in legal systems, in judgments, etc. And that's why it leads to a lot of loss of trust, that public awareness of the bias in AI can erode the trust in technology and institutions that are relying on artificial intelligence for decision making. So that's why it becomes very, very crucial for us to address all this bias, that we have to first and foremost ensure that there is diverse data set being used, that ensuring that the training data has been very diverse and representation is happening from everywhere. So that is very, very important. Similarly, the bias detection and correction is required. Implementing tools and implementing methods so that you can detect and correct the biases that are there in the data sets and models is also very, very crucial. Similarly, we have to understand that there have to be ethical practices which have to be established. Ethical guidelines have to be established in development and the use of artificial intelligence, including having accountability, having transparency and fairness. All these can guide the efforts to address the bias. So that's why they all become very, very crucial. So how do we address the bias? How do we address the bias? In case of addressing the bias, first thing that we'll need is that we are using diverse data set. All right, we have to use diverse data sets. Then second thing is important, that there should be bias detection. We should be able to do bias detection and correction. Bias detection and correction is required. Then after that, the ethical guidelines. We need proper ethical guidelines to ensure that we are not doing anything, and that's why unethical, and that's why transparency and fairness, accountability, etc. also have to be maintained. And then apart from that, we also need, for example, in case of human bias, we need people who are coming from all the groups. The people who are developing the AI, they have to come from all the groups, and that's why then only we can ensure that there is no bias, no human bias in that particular scenario. So then in that case, we have to be inclusive. We have to be inclusive in design and development. inclusive in design and development, that will address the human bias. So that's why we have to actually understand all these different aspects of the bias problem in AI, and especially becomes very, very crucial in the aspect of artificial intelligence and this Gemini case that we have seen. Then lastly, one small news that we had in today's news, and this is about, you can say, GS paper 3 environment and ecology, and this is about number of nuclear power reactors in India. There will be a total, what we are saying is that there will be a cumulative capacity addition of 13.8 gigawatt overall, which will take the energy mix in the power to 22 gigawatt altogether by 2031-32. Now we know that today we are looking for a lot of alternatives, and in these alternatives nuclear energy becomes very, very crucial, and nuclear energy is going to play a very important role in the energy future of the country. And this is where today we see that only 2 to 3%, maximum of 5% of energy comes from nuclear energy, whereas in the future our target is that at least 10% of the energy should come from nuclear power. And in this regard, we have seen that over the last couple of years there have been a lot of new introductions. For example, modular nuclear power plants are now being brought up, where smaller nuclear power plants will also start adding to the energy that we are producing from nuclear energy. So these kind of data can be important sometimes in your prelims examination or even in your mains examination. Now let's look at two of the questions from what we have discussed. First is about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has the potential to revolutionize various sectors of society. However, the inherent biases within the AI system pose significant ethical and societal challenges. Discuss the sources of bias, the impact on society, and comprehensive measures to address these biases. So something that we just discussed a couple of minutes back, that what are the various problems that can come into the system and how can we address those issues. So this is something that you can write. So you will introduce by saying what is AI, what is generative AI, what are the issues that we are facing today, and then talk about the bias, the different types of bias, and all the areas in which we can tackle those biases. And then lastly, examine the strategic significance of the Red Sea route in the global trade and measures that could be taken by international community to mitigate these challenges while ensuring safety and sustainability of this corridor. So again, we discussed the importance of Red Sea, we discussed what are the problems that we have, and then in that regard, what is IMEC and how IMEC can be very, very important in the context, especially in the context of India. So that's why all these are the points that can be written in this particular article or this particular answer, right? So this brings us to the end of our discussion in today's lecture. I know this has been a bigger video compared to the usual ones, but there were a lot of these articles today which needed proper explanation, so we were also out of option. But I hope that this session helped you, and please go back and revise these points as well. It will help you in the upcoming examinations for sure. So let me end the session here. Thank you very much.